When Mazda decided to make its first electric vehicle, the MX-30, it really demonstrated how it's a company that doesn't like to follow the crowd. It was anything but conventional. The philosophy was that it needed a smaller battery because most people don't do particularly long journeys, although most people unfortunately also fixated on that small range figure when you compared it to what else was available on the market. Now it's got a slightly different version. It's a plug-in hybrid or a range extender, denoted by this, and this symbol tells you a little bit of a clue about what it is. Mazda is bringing back the rotary motor, this time not to power the car exclusively, but to generate energy for a smaller battery to give it a much longer driving range. Now visually there's nothing really other than that badge to tell you that this is a different model to the fully electric MX-30. All the changes come under the skin, in particular underneath this bonnet. That rotary motor is an evolution of what we've had before in Mazda's previous cars, the last being the RX-8. This time around it works a lot differently. It's only there to generate energy for the battery, and it allows the car to have a total driving range of up to 680 kilometers. So the MX-30 is, as I've mentioned, far from conventional, and that includes the doors. Okay, you've got regular front doors, but again, like the RX-8 that preceded it, it's also got rear hinged back doors. Now, this is a very interesting design. It certainly stands out. It doesn't necessarily make it the most practical thing in the world, but you've got to admire Mazda for sticking to its guns and doing things differently. And just in case you haven't seen inside of an MX-30 before, let me just show you some of what it's like. Mazda's interiors have gotten steadily better over the years. There's a very nice attention to detail. The materials that are used are all very good inside. And you've got, it's not exactly overly complex. It's quite simple. You've got a very nicely arranged instrument display in front of you. It's very easy, very clear to read, so nothing's going to confuse you. It's nice to be able to see that at a glance. You've got a high mounted screen up here. It's not a touch screen because you have a second screen down here, which is a touch screen. If I'm honest, it's a little bit unusual because you've got all your ventilation controls here available by touch, but you still have physical buttons on either side of it. It kind of seems like it's doubled up. A little bit unusual, but you know, that's what Mazda has done. Everything else is very simple here. You've got electronic handbrake, you've got this rotary controller, which is very nice for using the menu system, the infotainment system, and obviously you can pair your smartphone and have all that sort of connectivity features as well. There are a couple of other little nice touches. You'll notice there's some cork material. Now, there's very few car makers out there that will put cork inside a car, but the reason Mazda does it, not only does it look nice and does it feel nice, but Mazda originally started way back when producing cork for bottles. So there you go, a little nugget of information. Now I'm sure you all want to see exactly what it's like to get into the back, and well, if I'm honest, it's not the most awkward, but it's not exactly ideal, and I'm not exactly the tallest person in the world. I'm only about 5'9" on a good day. Nevertheless, once you're actually in and you've not hit your head off that, there is actually a reasonable amount of space. Okay, this seat is maybe pushed a little bit forward, but I can get my feet in underneath the seat. There's a little catch here at the bottom for me to easily pop that forward once I've got the doors open. There are 3 positions in the back here. If I'm honest, it's going to be quite a squeeze to have 3 people in here. 2 adults though, they can get by okay, and you know, you've got the novelty of these funky doors. First of all, I want to address range, because it's one of those things that these days doesn't really matter for a lot of people. In fact, it shouldn't really matter for a lot of people, because what I mean is generally it's enough. If you have any sort of small car, say a Ford Fiesta or a Nissan Juke, like a crossover like this sort of size, and it's just a regular petrol car, you don't think about the range. It's enough. It's not really an issue. Range is a sort of thing that's really been hanging around the industry for as long as we've had electric cars in the current era. When they came out first, they didn't have very good ranges, so all the manufacturers and all the marketing people said, hey, look at our range, it's this much, and then next year it was more range again. And well, these days we have electric vehicles that will do 700-800 kilometers on a single charge. Now granted, that's at the more premium and luxury end, but we're getting there. But really, who does that in a day? Not really many people. Well, certainly anyone I know never does it, and myself never really do that kind of distance either. So for a lot of the time, most people are probably going to be doing 70, 80, 90 kilometers a day between work and doing a school run or doing what else you use your car for. And then you come home and you can charge it up at night and go again tomorrow. You don't have to pay as much to charge the battery, although you do have to do it more frequently, I accept that. But when you do have to charge that battery, doing it at a fast charger doesn't take as long. And also then, if you want to get into the whole argument over materials and how much sort of different materials go into your battery, well, it's better to have more cars that are slightly smaller, slightly lighter, with slightly smaller batteries that can go round, rather than having one big tank with a 120 kilowatt hour battery in it. Enough range. Granted, the battery in this range extender is even smaller again. It's about half the size. And as you drive along today, as we left with a full charge, you see that percentage tick down what most people might describe as at an alarming rate. We've done 43 kilometers so far since we started driving, and the battery is currently at 58% after starting from full. That's not great. Now granted, it's warm enough today and I've got the air conditioning on, but I'm only me in the car. I'm not carrying around the weight of 4 other people either. So, this is a small enough range. But for the journey I'm doing today from the airport to my hotel, it's just about enough that I can probably do it without even having to rely on the range extender. But you have that added sort of security of having a range extender. Now, we love rotary engines. Mazda, it's synonymous. When you think of rotary engines, you just think of Mazda. This time round though, it's not quite the screamer. This is certainly not channeling any inner 787B here. It's not even an ORX-7 for that matter. But generally, you don't really notice it. First of all, I need to explain, there's 3 different modes. So in the normal mode, which is when you basically the default mode, when you get in and you start driving it, it will use all of the battery and will only then activate the range extender when the battery is basically fully depleted. At which point then the range extender spins and generates energy. It never drives the wheels itself. So that's the important thing. It's similar in a way to how Nissan use their e-power system. They have a regular internal combustion engine, and that spins, generates energy that goes into the battery, and the wheels are driven by the electric motors. It's the same principle here, except this has a much smaller size rotary engine rather than a sort of 1.5 litre or 2 litre 4-cylinder engine, say, that you'd normally have in some plug-in hybrids. So that does a couple of different things then. You can use it just to generate energy that way. You can go into a charge mode, which will use that rotary engine to basically charge up the battery, generate more energy while you're driving. Or you can also set it to a hold setting. And what that will do is that will keep the battery level at, if currently I'm at 57%, it will keep it at 57%. So what it will do, it will sporadically activate and deactivate the rotary motor to generate enough energy to keep the battery at that level. So say you wanted to have, you're going to a low emission zone, for example, you would then be able to keep, I want to keep 60, 70, whatever percentage of battery you might want, you can keep that there, and it will only really top up any energy that's used while you're driving. So they're the 3 modes that you have in this setup. Now, the default mode works pretty well because for a lot of people, you're going to want to use all of the battery, right? That's the whole idea of it. You want to have your car fully charged, you get in, you keep driving, and you drive a little bit further than the battery would normally allow or permit with its charge, and once it runs out, the rotary engine just activates and starts topping up the battery, and you have no inconvenience. It all does work relatively well in that sense. You still don't have a colossal range in the terms of what you get purely from the battery. All told, you will get around about 680 kilometers based on a full charge of the battery and then the full use of a single petrol tank. So that's the entire range from full to empty on both counts of your power sources, 680 kilometers. That's not bad for a car of this size. It's probably on a par with what you might expect to find from, I guess, a similar size 1.2 litre petrol, no hybrid or whatever, crossover. So 680 kilometers, it's not bad. It's not great. It's certainly not going to be like the 1,000 kilometers you might get from a diesel, but it's okay. The fuel consumption on a combined cycle is around 7.1 litres per 100 kilometers, say Mazda. Now, again, by no means is that a stellar or a wonderfully low fuel consumption figure. Again, it's not bad. It's probably a little bit over what you might get from a very good hybrid car in typical real world everyday use. So you've got to kind of, it's not even so much as you're doing the numbers on this thing. I think you're kind of almost getting a car like this just because you want something that's different. The kind of USP of this car is that it's just different. It's not an electric car, first of all. This is a plug-in hybrid. That's what Mazda call it. In a way, you know, we don't have a whole lot of cars that kind of have been called a range extender. When BMW brought out the i3 first, that was an i3 and it was available with a range extender. That was a very different sort of setup. It had a little 2-cylinder engine, and it did the job quite well. It was a little bit buzzy, and this is too. If you just toggle this up and go into the charge mode, it then starts spinning. Now, you can tell it's running. I don't know exactly how well it's going to get picked up on the audio here, but you can tell that it's running. I'd love to say that it has a really nice sound to it, or, you know, seems quite nice, a bit like a thrummy 3-cylinder engine or something a bit different like that, but it's not. It kind of sounds like an old fridge or the outside part of an air conditioning unit. It's kind of just like a generator that's running. Another thing to point out is that the rotary motor is not connected to your speed as such. So if you put your foot down, it doesn't suddenly start spinning more. So it kind of operates across a relatively narrow window in terms of engine speed. But really it's kind of working independent of the car's speed or the car's performance or what you're asking of it, because it's only there to produce energy for the battery. That's its only role in this whole setup, in this unusual marriage of powertrains under the bonnet. So as the speed increases, obviously it's going to be consuming more electricity, more energy from the battery, and in which case the rotary motor will start to spin a little bit faster. It's never really, as I said, it's by no means a 787B that's screaming under the bonnet. And once you're up around this sort of speed at 70, 75 kilometers an hour, between, you know, tire noise and various other bits and pieces, you don't really notice it a whole lot. It's okay, it's there. In actual fact, if you have your left foot kind of resting on the bulkhead, you can kind of almost sometimes feel it a little bit. But it's there, it does that, and all you have is you have a little rotary symbol on your dashboard, on your digital instrument display, that shows you that it's active. There's a little blue electric sort of lightning bolt that tells you it's charging. All that being said though, at lower speeds, where you don't have that kind of road noise or anything as you're driving through a small town, if the motor is running as it is now, it is kind of all you can hear. And it's kind of odd because it's not, as I mentioned, it's not related to the throttle position. So if I put my foot down a little bit more, it just kind of stays at this flat engine RPM. And that does make it sound really like you've just got kind of sort of generator you might expect to see around the back of a food tent at a music festival running underneath the bonnet there. It's just this kind of, not quite a drone, it's not as bad as a drone, but it's just running there at a constant speed. So that is a little bit unusual. Nevertheless, once you get out on the open road, noise kind of gets drowned out a little bit more because you've got tire noise and you've got, you know, a little bit of wind noise and things like that. And the Mazda is quite a nice car to drive. It's kind of just comfortable, it's nice and compliant. There's a little bit of roll in the corners, so it will lean a little bit in corners. It doesn't feel like an out and out electric vehicle in the sense that you don't get that feeling that there's a huge, big, heavy battery that's right below the axle line, where, you know, it's got a super low center of gravity. It doesn't feel taut. A lot of the modern EVs, especially SUV styles that are normally sit a little bit higher from the ground, kind of have this really tight, firm feeling. You know, as soon as you go around the corner, they almost don't lean. You know, but you don't have any sort of active anti-roll stabilization here. It's much more natural in that sense. It feels very much like a normal car. When I say a normal car, like your typical combustion engine car you might have had a few years ago. The steering is nice. It's, as soon as you sort of get off center, it goes exactly where you want it to. There's no sort of vagueness to it or anything like that. But sitting here at 100 kilometers an hour, you can just about make out that engine is running. It's no big deal. What's also quite surprising is how quickly it does charge that battery up. I guess because the battery itself isn't all that big. It's a little over 17 kilowatt hours, so it's really not a massive battery, so it doesn't take that long to charge up. So even if you did want to maybe just add another 50% back onto it when it runs low, you can do that over a relatively short time and distance, and then just simply go back to the normal mode, push a button, and you're suddenly back to driving at pure electric power. So again, you do have a bit of choice with this, but I think you're really going to have to use the system a lot to kind of get the most out of it and find out what works best for you. Obviously, the main thing is you want to be plugging this car in all the time. You want to have it, if you get home at night, plug it in, have it fully charged, you come out in the morning and you're ready to go. And really, you need to only think, or you should only really be thinking of that rotary motor as a backup. It's a safety net. It is, for example, if you're on a bit of a long journey and you might want to pull in and stop at a charge point, and you get there and you go, oh, they're all occupied or they're too busy, you can just press on with your journey and keep going. You don't have to sit there and wait and hope that, oh, well, maybe they might be nearly finished charging, I can plug in again. And that in itself has an intrinsic value. That is something that just gives you that bit of added comfort. I think a lot of people who might buy this car are going to buy this car because they want to probably use it on electric power as much as possible. That's the whole idea. If I was going to look at the car like this, for me, I see plug-in hybrids almost like a game. I want to use that petrol engine or whatever is powering it from combustion. I want to use that as little as possible. I want to get the most out of the battery. I want to always be using it, but also I want to just not have to constantly plan, do I need to charge, do I have to pull in here, will there be a charger available? That's what the benefit of a car like this can do. In terms of numbers as well, just to give you a bit of an idea, now today we've a bit of a mixed journey. We've got some motorways, we've got some very rural roads, some town driving, a bit of everything. Probably a good mixture of what anyone is going to typically encounter on a day-to-day basis. So far, according to the trip computer, the electrical side is consuming 15.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and the few instances that I've activated the range extender to charge the battery, just because I kind of want to see, not because I needed to, that has consumed 5.1 litres per 100 kilometers of petrol. So that just gives you an idea of what it's like. Now, I'm still now back at 67% because I've charged the battery up a little bit more, but I'm 65 kilometers into my journey now. I could still be doing it entirely on the original battery charge. So it just gives you a bit of an idea of what it's like. If you use it sparingly, use that rotary motor sparingly, you're probably not going to see a huge fuel consumption figure. And obviously the less you use that, the more it goes down. It's already dropped down now to 4.9, and it will probably keep going down as soon as I have this off as the journey progresses. But it's just to give you a bit of an idea in this instance of what the trip computer is saying. It does work pretty well. It's a little bit different. That's kind of the biggest thing about this. You're not probably, when you sit down and do your maths, if you ran one of these for 6 months or 12 months, if you're doing a lot of long journeys, it's probably not going to be the most fuel efficient thing in the world, but it's got a bit of character, it's a bit unusual, it's quirky, and that's what Mazda is these days. Mazda is one of the few decently sized car companies that isn't part of some enormous conglomerate. It's kind of out there doing its own thing, and that's part of the charm about Mazda. They kind of forge their own path. They don't really like to follow the crowd. You see that in the models that they produce. You see it in the engines that they offer, not only with this electric version and with this range extender version, but across with their other Sky Active models. They're always looking to do something a little bit different. So that's our review of the Mazda MX-30 or EV. If you want to know more about the car, do head to our website. It's CompleteCar.ie. You'll find it linked in the description below. It's a great resource for finding your next new car. Thanks for watching.